My name is Owen Ridge, and for 15 years, the frozen silence of the Himalayas has been my only companion. At 45, I've traded city sirens for the whisper of wind over snow and the crowded streets for the single winding path of Lukla. This village isn't on most maps. It's a handful of stone houses clinging to the mountainside, a community where every face is a known face, every voice a familiar song. We are a people of the cold, bound by the deep, respectful quiet of winter. The rumors were as much a part of the landscape as the pine forests and the glacial peaks. Old man Karma, who ran the tea house, would sip his chang and murmur about shadows taller than the pines. The herders would sometimes return with tales of footprints in the high passes, impressions too large for a bear, too deliberate for a trick of the ice. We'd nod, pour another drink, and call it a story, a myth to explain the strange noises in the blizzard, a legend to give shape to the vast, unknown dark that surrounded our little island of light. BIGFOOT, the yeti, Migoy, a dozen names for the same campfire tale. It changed on the night the silence broke. It wasn't the wind. I know every cadence of the mountain gales. This was a raw, human sound, ripped from the throat, a scream of pure, hysterical terror. Then another, higher, sharper. It came from the direction of Anil and Pema's cottage, barely 100 yards down the slope. My blood, which had been flowing slow and cold with the season, turned to fire. Instinct, older than my years here, took over. I swung my legs from the bed, the stone floor biting my feet. I grabbed my heavy woolens, my thick parka, and my old .303 rifle, a relic from my grandfather that I kept oiled and ready more out of habit than need. I never thought I'd need it for this. I burst into the night. The world was a monochrome of blue-black shadows and bone-white snow under a sliver of moon. The screams had stopped, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure. The only sound was the crunch of my boots and the frantic drum of my heart. Their door was open, swinging on its hinges with a soft, rhythmic groan. A single oil lamp still burned inside, casting a jaundiced, dancing light onto the trampled snow outside. That's where I saw the blood. It wasn't a trickle. It was a series of dark, gleaming pools soaking into the pristine snow, so shockingly red in the lamplight they seemed almost artificial. The tracks leading away from the doorstep were chaotic, human boot prints, scrambling. Then they were simply gone, replaced by two deep, heavy gouges in the snow, as if something massive had dragged a great weight into the tree line. "Anil! Pema!" My voice was swallowed by the vastness. Nothing. My rifle stock was against my shoulder, my breath pluming in ragged gasps. I forced my legs to move, to approach the edge of the forest. That's when I saw it, caught on a low, splintered branch of a juniper bush, a tuft of coarse, matted fiber. I leaned close, my glove hovering. It wasn't wool. It wasn't bear fur. It was a strange, grizzled, gray-brown, thick as boar bristle, but longer, and it smelled musky, feral, and faintly metallic, like cold stone and old copper. I pulled it free. It was coarse against my leather palm. It belonged to something else, something that walked on two legs and carried screaming villagers into the dark. I stood there in the freezing night, the tuft of unknown hair in one hand, my grandfather's rifle in the other, staring into the forest that no longer felt like just trees and snow, but a living, watching throat.
The morning brought no comfort, only a deeper, more penetrating cold. The village of Lukla, usually stirring with the soft clatter of milking pails and the scent of smoke and frying bread, was paralyzed. We stood in a tight, silent knot in the yard outside Anil and Pema's empty home. 10 of us, maybe. My closest neighbor, Dorje, a man with a face like weathered oak, stared at the stained snow. His wife, Yang Chen, held a prayer wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Old man Karma just shook his head, his earlier stories now a cruel prophecy. "We must search," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "They could be hurt, lost." Dorje met my eyes, his own full of a grim certainty. "You saw the tracks, Owen. You saw what was left. No one gets lost that way." A systematic, fearful search of the immediate woods yielded nothing. No scraps of clothing, no more blood. Just those two deep, dragging grooves that vanished where the wind had scoured a rocky ledge clean. It was as if the mountain itself had opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. The council meeting was held in the village temple, the air thick with the smell of butter lamps and fear. The monk, Rinpoche Tenzin, a gentleman now etched with deep worry, listened as I described the scene, the hair. I produced it, sealed in a clear plastic bag. It passed from hand to trembling hand. "It is like the stories," whispered Tashi, the young school teacher. "The Migoi hair my grandmother described." "Stories do not leave blood on the ground," Dorje countered, his voice low and hard. A consensus, cold and inevitable, settled over us. This was no bear, no snow leopard, no manned-wandering madman. The logic was terrifying in its simplicity. The sheer scale of the prints implied by the gouges, the strength needed to take two struggling adults without a prolonged fight, the unnatural hair. The rumors we had laughed at for generations were no longer rumors, they were a diagnosis. "It must be Bigfoot," I said, the word feeling absurd and utterly serious on my tongue. A collective shiver passed through the room. Naming it made it real.
That night, a watch was set. Dorje and I took the first shift, huddled in my doorway with rifles, scanning the tree line. The village huddled behind locked doors, every window dark. The wind picked up, singing a higher, sharper note through the eaves. Just before dawn, we heard it, not a scream, but a low, reverberating hoot that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't animal, wasn't human. It was a sound of profound loneliness and immense, ancient power. It echoed once, then was gone. The next night, little Nima, a herder's son who lived on the very edge of the village, vanished. His father found the boy's favorite wool cap, torn at the edge of the pasture. More of the coarse, grizzled hair was snagged on the fence wire. The third night, it was the elderly sisters, Lamo and Dolma. Their cottage was untouched, a pot of tea still warm on the stove. Their front door was open. 2 pairs of small, sensible shoes were left neatly on the step, as if they had stepped out for a moment into the snow in their stockings. They never returned. Panic, slow and cold, began to seep through Lukla's stones. Some spoke of packing what they could and attempting the treacherous pass to the next valley. Others argued we were safer together. The feeling was universal. We were being hunted, cold, and we had no way to fight back. Sitting in my dark kitchen, the weight of the rifle across my lap, I felt a crushing helplessness. Then, like a spark surfaced in the dark, a memory surfaced. My grandfather's voice, rough as bark, speaking to me when I was no more than 10, sitting by a fire not unlike this one. He was a hunter, a man of few words, but his eyes had been deadly serious. "The world up here has its own rules, boy," he'd said, poking the embers. "Men are not always the top of the mountain. If you're ever lost, or if the old dark things ever stir, remember the chest, the iron-banded chest in the root cellar. If you meet him, you open it, you do what it says." I'd thought it part of a game, a grandfather's dramatic tale. Now, with the hoot of the creature still haunting the wind, It felt like the only thread left to pull. I lit a lantern and descended the creaking wooden steps into the basement, the earth smell of potatoes and stone rising to meet me. There, behind jars of preserves, was the chest. It was small, banded in rusted iron, and sealed with a heavy, old-fashioned padlock I had no key for. Desperation grants strength. I brought a pickaxe down. The lock shattered, the iron bands groaned. Lifting the lid, the smell of camphor and old paper wafted out. Inside, resting on a piece of faded velvet, was a book. It was handwritten, the script a careful, sloping cursive in faded brown ink, my grandfather's journal. And beside it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a single heavy cartridge, unlike any bullet I'd ever seen. My hands trembled as I opened the book. I flipped past entries about weather and game until I found the pages that made my blood freeze. The Silver One, the heading read, the Eater of Silence. The descriptions were clinical, detailed from some long-ago encounter. Height, gait, the chilling intelligence in its eyes. And then the crucial passage, underlined twice. Lead and steel will only anger it. Its hide turns ordinary shot like rain off slate. The heart can be pierced, the life taken, but only by a metal purer than hatred, colder than its own winter. The old ones called it starlight iron, a meteorite metal. It must be forged into a bullet with a clear purpose and a steady hand. It is the only way. I unwrapped the oilcloth. The cartridge was intact, but the bullet itself was strange, a dull, almost bluish gray, etched with faint spiraling lines. It felt preternaturally heavy for its size. This was the prototype, the proof, and we had only one. To fight this thing, we would need more. We would need to forge a new bullet, and I knew only one man with the skill, the fire, and the heart to try.
I found my cousin Norbu at his forge, even though it was not yet dawn. The bellows were still, the fire banked to embers. He was already awake, staring into the orange coals as if they held an answer. Norbu was built like the anvil he pounded, broad, solid, immovable. His hands, scarred and powerful, rested on his knees. He didn't look up as I entered. "You heard the sound last night," I said, not a question. Everyone heard it, his voice a low rumble. "The valley is its throat now." I placed my grandfather's journal and the single strange bullet on the soot-blackened workbench between us. The blue-gray metal caught the faint glow of the embers, seeming to drink the light rather than reflect it. Norbu's eyes flicked to it, then to the journal. He reached out, not for the bullet, but for the book. His thick fingers turned the brittle pages with a surprising gentleness. He read the passage on starlight iron in silence, his lips moving slightly over the old words. "A meteorite," he finally said, looking up. The fear in his eyes was now mixed with a hunter's focus. "Sky iron. I have heard tales. My own grandfather spoke of a shepherd who found a hot black stone that sang when the wind hit it right. He said it came from a star that died." "Do you believe it? That this metal can kill that thing out there?" He closed the journal with a soft thud. "I believe your grandfather did not waste ink on fairy tales when lives were at stake. And I believe that bullet," he pointed a blunt finger at it, "is not of this earth. I can feel it from here. It's cold, a deep cold." He met my gaze. "The question is not if I believe, Owen. The question is, where do we find more?" The journal held one more clue, a sketched map, frustratingly vague, of a high glacial cirque on the shoulder of Mount Amadablam, a place the old hunters called the Silent Circle. A note read, "Where the sky wept fire long ago, the stones remember." It was a 2-day climb into deadly terrain. We prepared in a frenetic, silent hurry. We told no one else the full truth, only that we were searching for a way to fight back. Dorje and young Chen promised to keep the watch, to bolt every door. The look in their eyes was the look of people seeing a ghost of hope, fragile as an icicle. The climb was a journey out of the world of men. The air grew thin and sharp. The peaceful snow of Lukla transformed into a blinding, wind-scoured hellscape. We moved through a cathedral of ice, past seracs that gleamed like fallen teeth, over crevices hidden by innocent-looking snow bridges. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of our crampons and the ragged saw of our breath. On the second afternoon, as a bruised purple dusk began to bleed into the sky, we found a silent circle. It was a perfect, unnatural bowl in the mountain, shielded from the wind. And there, scattered across the bluish ice like forgotten offerings, were the stones. They were black, pitted, and fused into the glacier itself. Some were no larger than a fist. One was the size of a small goat. They looked utterly alien against the white and blue. "The sky wept fire," Norbu whispered, awe stripping the hardness from his voice. Using ice axes and no small amount of straining, we pried 3 of the smaller stones free. They were astonishingly heavy. As we worked the largest one loose, a strange thing happened. A low harmonic hum seemed to vibrate up from the ice, through our tools, into our bones. It was the sound of the wind channeling through the pitted holes in the meteorite, the shepherd's singing stone. The sound was lonely and ancient, and it raised the hair on my neck. We loaded the precious otherworldly ore into our packs. The descent was a blur of exhaustion and mounting dread. Every shadow in the rocks seemed to shift. Every gust of wind sounded like that low, questioning hoot. We were being watched. The creature knew the mountains better than we ever would. It knew we were here. We reached the outskirts of Lukla just after nightfall. No lights shone. It was a village of tombs. Dorje emerged from his door, his face gaunt. "While you were gone," he said, his voice cracking, "the Yaunton family, their dog was found torn in 2, laid on their doorstep. They are barricaded inside, half mad with fear. It is playing with us, Owen. It is letting us know there is no hole deep enough to hide." Norbu hefted his pack, the meteorite stones within clinking with a sound like broken bells. "Then we stop hiding. We bring the fire to it."
We hurried to the forge. The time for secrecy was over. We showed the stones to Dorje, to Yangchen, to the few others brave enough to gather. Hope, desperate and fierce, flickered in their eyes. But as Norbu stoked his furnace to a roaring, hellish heat, a new fear took root. The journal described the forging process in cryptic, alchemical terms. It spoke of a heat that mirrors the star's death and quenching in water that has never seen the sun. We had the ore, we had the skill, but did we have the right? Norbu placed the first black stone into the heart of the coals. We waited and waited. Ordinary iron would have begun to glow cherry red within minutes. This stone sat there, black and implacable, as if defying the very concept of fire.
If you liked the story, subscribe and like it, and also write a comment about what topic you would like to hear about.